All right, perfect. So let's get started. I don't want to waste any time. It's not every day that we get to speak with Chris. So thanks everyone for joining, especially all those people who joined like 10, 15 minutes. Even before me, there were like 30 people joining the bridge. That's exciting. Personally, this means a lot to me because when I joined, I started my career at Infosys in 2010. Chris was the CEO, the person who all of us looked up to. I just met you once when during one of the Mysore events when you came down. Obviously, after that, I started Profoundis, where I got the good fortune to sit down with you a couple of times or more. And when we exited the company in 2016, you were kind enough to write an article about the exit. So yeah, it means a lot to me, and I'm very excited to sit down and kind of. My job here is to moderate this, Chris. I Most of the questions that I'm going to ask is coming directly from the members and attendees who are on the
Mhm.
call. So there will be a little bit of going back and forth. I've tried my best to arrange it according to a flow, but there'll still be a little bit of jumping around. I hope that's
Okay.
fine. And to all the attendees, please keep the questions coming. We are taking an active look at it. We do have a lot of questions already, but I'll try my level best to ask as many questions as possible to Chris. With that, thanks a lot, Chris, for taking out the time. We don't have to do an intro for you. Everyone knows who you are. So I just wanted to kick it off, take you a little bit to your memory lane as to just get an understanding of why did you start Infosys and what was the thought process behind when you actually kicked off Infosys tens of years ago?
Yeah, it's truly a long time back, 39 years back, 1981, right? So far off in memory. I was 25 at that point, very young, probably younger than most of the participants here. But uh, we wanted to do something in India. See, all of us had come out of IIT. Most of the classmates, batchmates would go abroad. Normally, that's what they do from IITs. But we wanted to do something in India. We wanted to do something leveraging the talent that's available in India. We knew that software would be in great demand. A lot of software would have to be written. And we said, why can't we combine the demand which is there for software to the advantage that India has, which is high quality talent at lower cost, because we are a lower cost economy. How can we do that? And this was before internet came, before telecom infrastructure was built up, etc. And so I still remember that initially we would develop the software and ship the code on tapes. We would send two couriers, because if one gets lost or mishandled, at least the other would reach. And it would take 2 weeks for the software to reach US. Somebody will be there from our side on in the US with who will install the software and support and maintain it. That's how Infosys started. Later on, of course, in the late 80s, 89, we set up our first data communication link, and that's the beginning of developing software online. And of course, with internet coming in the mid 90s, it became widely used as the model for developing software out of places like India. Before I turn it back to you, let me thank everyone. I really appreciate all of you joining, and hopefully we can have a fun session. And thank you, Arjun, for moderating this, and thanks to IEEE for organizing this. Back to you, Arjun.
Thanks, Chris. Um, so for almost 40 years back, from a couriering of code to everything happening on cloud these days, things have changed a lot. So how would you compare and contrast a little bit? What do you think it's a really good time to start a company now, and why?
There is, you know, there is no good time or bad time. I consider that it's based on your circumstances, individual circumstances. If you have a good idea to create a business around that idea, any time is the right time, right? Um, So when we started, for example, there was no concept of venture capital. Nobody understood software services in India. We bootstrapped the company. That means we made profits from the first year, invested that profit back into the business, and that's how we grew the business. We didn't take external investment. Today, of course, you have venture capital available. India is seen as a destination for software, anything that's technology related. India has access to now venture capital, a lot of venture capital is available. India has examples of very large unicorns. The last count before, of course, the COVID struck was, some 38, 39 unicorns from India. Third best location for startups. So the situation is completely different. And with cloud, with mobile, with internet, with a lot of open source software and things like that available, the cost of doing a startup is very low today. And that's the reason why you see a lot of technology enabled startups as well as technology startups today.
Got it. But Chris, there is also the cost advantage that you mentioned, the one that you kind of started leveraging when you started Infosys. Is that still there in India, or do you think that that cost advantage is getting bridged very fast compared to the Western countries?
So it depends on what your product or service is. When you look at let's say IT services, the cost advantage is very much there. India continues to be a lower cost economy. Typically, even the best paid software engineers in India earn maybe a third to a fourth of what a best paid software engineer in the US would earn. And that cost advantage is still there because in services, people cost is the highest cost.
Sure.
Now, when it comes to product, for example, then other factors come in. Sales and marketing costs, support costs. You need to have resources on the ground in the markets in which you operate, and then the cost of R&D becomes only a small part, maybe 15, 20, 30%. Whereas in the services business, the cost of people is almost 60%, 55 to 60%. So that cost advantage is significant. And that's the reason why this model of remotely developing software, especially from India, has become mainstream today. And every company that you can think of, every IT company today has the second or the third or the fourth largest base of talent, base of developers in India today.
Got it. And yeah, when you started Infosys, you were from IITs, and do you think it is important to graduate from an IIT or a BITS or something like that to start a company or something like that? What do you think?
There is definitely an advantage in terms of network, in terms of brand, in terms of awareness. So when you say you are from an IIT, fund, they typically would listen. I have to say, I have to admit that there are some advantages of where you studied, etc. Later on, that network becomes very important because, when you look around and see top leadership in many organizations, you'll find that there are people from IIT, alumni of IITs in senior positions. So they typically would actually listen to you, will give you an appointment, etc. So that network definitely helps. Having said that, when it comes to skills, capabilities, value add, intelligence, etc., I would rate anybody who is in the top of the class, who is doing very well in studies, in any, let's say, engineering, any college actually, to do well, because they will probably be as good or sometimes better than an average person from an IIT.
Got it. But that also means that you actually think that education is key to the growth of the professional. Because we hear this, Sorry, we
I,
hear this dropping out thing from, Mark Zuckerberg and Steve Jobs of the world.
uh, see, everybody, if you listen to Bill Gates or any of these people, you will find that they dropped out because they were bored. They dropped out because they didn't find value in what stream that they have taken. They went deep into the subject that was interesting to them, and they spent enormous amount of time learning that subject. So learning cannot be discounted. I think we all need to commit to continuous learning. And even today, I can tell you that I spend about an hour reading up. Of today, most of my reading is about healthcare and COVID and things like that. But I read every single day. I read, and I can't imagine me stopping reading, trying to learn.
Mhm. Got it. So the learning trumps you have to continuously learn, whether through a degree or not. Um, but do you
Yes.
also think that having a degree is important because there are some data and stats out there that says getting to a degree will accelerate your probability of, in some way succeeding in your career.
That's because today it's a very competitive world. It's a very crowded world. For every opening that's available, job opportunity that's available, hundreds of people are applying, and typically the first round of filtration more and more is becoming a computer algorithm.
Right.
Right? And what would you program this algorithm? You would program, what has been academic record, where did that person pass from, what is, CGPA that the person has got, what is the work experience, and that's the first level of filtering. You won't even get to meet a person to explain your idea or, how smart you are, etc. It'll all get filtered out, and that's the reason why, unfortunately, all these things matter.
Got it. So for all the students in on the call, don't think super radical. You have to stick to some conventions before you can start thinking radical.
For most people,
Mhm.
that's true.
Yeah. Oh, right. Okay. So some questions, Chris, going into some of the questions that we have already gotten. I'm a fresh salaried person. What are some of the investment methods that you would suggest for me?
Wow, I'm really not an investment advisor. But having said that, uh, two, three habits I would suggest that you inculcate or cultivate from the beginning. The first one is try and save some money and start investing. It's very important to get into the habit, even if it's just 200 rupees or 300 rupees, and start investing and growing a nest egg. I think that habit is very important. The difference between what you earn and what you spend is the money that you have that will go on to build a nest egg for future days and things like that. That's the money that you can use to do a startup or things like that. The second habit I would recommend everybody start is giving back. And giving back does not mean you have to invest in money, you put money in. You can actually volunteer time. You can choose a good cause, help somebody, for example, with their homework. There may be somebody who needs that help. But start giving back, helping others. And again, that's a habit that you need to start early on. And that's one regret I have in my life. Till I stepped down from Infosys in 2014, I never spent time outside working in the NGO sector or in boards of other companies and things like that. I was 150% doing what Infosys required, except for maybe little bit with Confederation of Indian Industries. But I would say that that's also part of being a CEO. You need to have a platform that gives you influence, and CI gave me that platform, and so in some sense that's part of my job. But after 2014 is when I started my philanthropic activities. I started supporting students with scholarships and doing many of the things that I do today. Uh, and I feel that I've, I've lost out a lot in enjoying that feeling of helping somebody else.
Got it. One of the questions that just came real time from uh, Venkaya. What is your defining moment uh, uh, to kind of go out and do something big? Is there a moment like that?
There are multiple, so when I was a student at IIT Madras, for example, I was doing MSc Physics and I had no idea what a computer was, etc. This is way back in 1977. And accidentally, I took a free Fortran programming course that was offered in the campus. In fact, it was recommended by Professor Mahabala, and I liked it. Luckily, I got admission to a master's in computer science at IIT Madras itself, and it completely changed my, future. So that was quite transformational. I joined Padni Computer Systems coming out of IIT. Again, not a very well-known company. I had got admission to, I got employment in one of the Tata companies actually, but I chose Padni because I felt joining a smaller company would actually accelerate my career and I will learn more. So I joined Padni Computers. Again, I think luck, right? Because at Padni Computers, all of us met together. Narayan Murthy, Nandan Nilekani, all of us worked together, and then decided to start Infosys. So there are many such, defining moments. When I was CEO, for example, I became CEO in 2007. 2008 was the financial crisis and the world got turned upside down. And I had to face that situation and lots of challenges. Fortunately for me, I came out of that doing well for the company, for Infosys, and many such interesting milestones and points in life.
Right. One of the things that you mentioned there was interesting that you got Tata, which is amazing brand, obviously, even during that time, even now. But you joined Putney because you wanted to join a smaller company because you the acceleration of learning. Do you feel that that's still true? Would you advise our younger professionals to join smaller companies than bigger companies?
It all depends on what your circumstances are, and this is what I tell people. If your circumstances allow you to take risk, right, then you must actually take risk because without taking risk, you will not get superior returns or you will not get a, a bigger opportunity.
Mhm.
But if your circumstances are such that, for example, you want a safe job because you have aging parents you need to take care of, your brothers and sisters that are still studying and you need to take care of them. The family circumstances are such that you need a steady job, then your decision will be very different. If you are, let's say, from a well-off family, maybe your decision is very different. You will say, okay, let me spend 2 3 years trying to do a startup. So it depends on the circumstances.
Got it. It's a related question that came in earlier. So somebody is asking, how can we know if we are comfortable with failures? You said about taking a risk, but if I'm 25, I'm still figuring myself out, right?
So again, it's dependent on the circumstances, and you need to, um, constantly evaluate your circumstances and decide whether you can take that risk and accept failure, um, or or um, nobody looks forward to a failure, nobody plans for a failure, but failure is definitely a possibility when you take higher risk, right? And so it depends on the circumstances. But what is important is that uh, you evaluate always the risk and the reward. You evaluate and come out with a plan B. So when we decided to start Infosys, I told you I was 25. My thinking was at that point, if this fails in, let's say, in 2 3 years, I will go and get another job.
Right.
So it was a easy decision for me, yeah, even though we never imagined that this will be so successful or never knew what it is to start a business in that environment because there were no uh, no examples at that point. Most of the companies around were um, conglomerates, family owned, etc. in India. No first generation entrepreneurial venture doing extremely well, etc. Those examples were not there. But we felt, this is a risk worth taking.
Got it. Uh, Another real-time question that came up. You said you started at 25. Somebody is asking, they have been working salaried for 34 years of their life. Can they start a company of their own? In other words, is there an age limit? Is there a perfect age to start a company?
I believe there are two, periods where, you can take that risk. First is when you pass out, when you're a student, like I said, you have no dependence, most probably, and you are able to take that risk. Um, all it does is delays, the um, employment time, right? When you go for an employment, etc. The second period, I believe, is when your children have just joined college. That means, let's say you're married, your kids have become, 15, 16, and they are starting to become independent. You've also created some savings and reduce the risk to the family, etc. And you want to, and you are also little bored with what you're doing now, and you're willing to now take risk. So those are the two periods, and this second one can actually be an extended period because the period when the children go to college and they become fully independent, they earn on their own, that can extend now to all the way to become, till you are 60, 65, etc. It doesn't matter. So beyond the age of, let's say, um, no, let's say 40. Between the age of 40 and 60, yes, it's actually good. What is more important is that you have a great idea of doing a startup and you are able to take that risk.
Got it. A question from Mehek. What factors do you think contributed in making Infosys a success? Like, is it a personal skill? Is it a teamwork? Like, what are the top two or three that you would point out?
First of all, we had, I believe, the ideal um, team, the founder team. We complemented each other, we respected each other, we were friends, family, working almost like family members, though none of us are related to each other. Uh, and definitely that team contributed. Second, we were at the right place at the right time with the right idea. 1981 was when the PC was introduced. It democratized computing. Office automation started at that point. That means offices started putting computers on the desktop and automating a lot of the business processes, which means lots and lots of software had to be written, a lot of business processes had to be automated, and we were able to provide that as a service at a high quality, lower cost. So that's a fantastic value proposition. And after we started, when we started scaling up, the internet came. When we started scaling up, Y2K came, which created a huge demand. The internet bubble, the telecom bubble. So we were actually on a exponential growth trajectory. We were at the right place at the right time with the right idea, and it worked. Of course, we executed very well. We did things, right way and things like that. So that's what I would say is the reason for success. We stuck together. We stuck with the idea. We were true to the idea. We never lost focus. A lot of people have asked the question, why didn't you do that? Why didn't you do this, etc. And when we failed very early with not significant impact to the business. So I think we were we executed well and we were in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, people say like when you start up, right, two people or three people makes a team. You were seven people when you started, right? And that's a big team. And obviously, startup has more lows than highs, which could create conflicts and difficult conversations. And one of the biggest problems of startups is co-founder issues. How did you manage like 7 people together, going together for such a long time?
Uh, uh, we were lucky, I would say, but remember that in 1989, one of the founders left. At that point, we had not done too well. After 8 years of effort, we had nothing to show in terms of individual wealth. None of us owned any vehicle or a house or anything flat, whereas all our colleagues, classmates, batchmates were well settled by that time, married with house, car, etc. And so we had an introspection. We had a offer to buy us out for $1 million in 1981, and
Imagine that.
we decided not to sell out, and one person decided to leave us actually, Ashok Arora, because he said, this is really, really stupid not to take this offer, and so he left us actually. But
Mhm.
rest actually stuck together, and partly because our values were middle class, our wants, needs were not that much. So we were more interested in creating something which is respected, something big, making a difference, etc. And that's the reason why we all stuck together because all of us had the similar values also.
Got it. So a lot of questions are coming talking about COVID. Primarily two things coming up. Like, do you think India has the opportunity to kind of take some of the opportunities that will move out of China? If yes, how should the country respond to that opportunity?
I strongly believe that we have an opportunity to um, not just from China, from rest of the world also to um, capture certain spaces, certain markets, certain products, etc. Just when I look at COVID alone, for example, you know, before the um, crisis struck, we were importing all the PPEs, all the personal protection equipment, all the um, gloves, all the test kits and things like that. And suddenly, within a span of 4 to 5 weeks, we have figured out how to make those things in India, right? And supply to rest of the world potentially. When you look at the vaccine itself, there are two, three companies in India who will be involved in large scale manufacturing. Of course, this will be licensed from somebody outside the country, but the manufacturing will happen in India because we have the capacity to manufacture vaccines in large quantities and supply to the rest of the world. I strongly believe that we have the opportunity to do R&D in life sciences and things like that, and infectious diseases, etc. There's so many opportunities just in life sciences alone, and we are demonstrating that every single day. Today morning, I used a tool called AirMeet, and I'm not advertising for that, but what struck me was this was developed by a small company in India as an alternative to Zoom and WebEx and things like that. So there are significant opportunities for us to actually develop stuff for the world.
Got it. And how should our young professionals get into it? Like, life sciences is a complicated field. Manufacturing is a resource intensive company to start. So how can we do something, or how can we think about doing something in those spaces?
The step-by-step process is the same. You need to have a team which has some knowledge in the field, some expertise in the field, comes out with an idea where they can put together a business plan, attract investors to invest in that, and that's how you address this issue of uh, you know where do you get the capital and things like that. Manufacturing, of course, is a little bit more challenging because you need the capital for the infrastructure, the facilities, the capital for working capital, things like that. But it's possible to do these things. And in automotive, for example, advanced manufacturing is doing very well in India. We are in fact making parts for aircraft in India. So anything is possible out of India. Um, in IT services, we have proven that. In software products, we have proven that. You yourself are an example of that. And there are many other companies that have done well in many of these fields. Zoho is there, Freshdesk is there, and there are many other companies which are doing very well.
Riffing off on that one about you talked about having a team. One question came in earlier today was, what makes a perfect team? Or when I think about, I have an idea, how should I go about, who should I look for?
Typically, these are people who you have known for some time. Ideally, you have worked together for some time so that you know in the working environment how does a person perform. You respect each other, you have similar values, similar goals and objectives. So, for example, if one person says, I want to become rich in next 3 years, that's my horizon. Another person says, I'm willing to wait for 10 years, some incompatibility is there. Because if things become tough, the person who has got a 3 year horizon will say, no, 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 I need to now find a job, right? Because my horizon is 3 years. So uh, that kind of honest discussion about what do you want in life, what is your purpose, what are your goals, what are your horizons, time horizons, all these discussions must happen before you get into doing a startup together, because building a company, doing a startup has lots and lots of challenges. It's very stressful. Everything is not going to go right, and things are going to be difficult some of the time, or sometimes most of the time. And that's when people need to stick together. And they can stick together only if a lot of alignment is there in goals, values, objectives. What do you look for in life? Maybe families need to know each other, all of that stuff.
Got it.
And that's
So
why I
that
said people would have worked together, or maybe they know from student days and things like that. That's where you find your co-founders.
understood. So trust, goals, values, three elements. How about the skill side of things? Do I find people who are like me, who are not like me? How do I go about the skill finding?
Ideally, complementary skills, so that as things grow, you need to give everyone space to develop themselves. Otherwise, they'll be stepping on each other's toes. If everybody's interest is technology, then who's going to do the sales and marketing? You'll have to get somebody senior and maybe call that person a co-founder from outside, right? You need to have complementary skills. You need to give space for each other to, perform, get satisfaction, etc.
Right. Uh, is this the same thing that you would advise when we hire people also? Because there is another question that says, how can I avoid hiring the wrong people for my company?
Always hire the best people you can get. Try and hire people who will fill in the gaps that you have, and which is what you need to do when you look for hiring. Complementary skills, uh, people whom you would like to work with, work together, etc. So look for complementary skills, look for people who are the best in what they do.
Yeah. The next question, it's again aligned with the team only, but what should I look for when I am trying to find a mentor for my company? Who is a good mentor? What are the things that I should look for?
This is um, an area where I have some opinion which differs from opinions of other people,
That's
and I
good.
will state that upfront. Actually, I strongly feel that a mentor should never take compensation for mentoring.
Okay.
Okay? You should do mentoring because you like to help somebody else, you like to see somebody succeed, you like to give back. To me, that's the ideal mentor, and that's what I do when I mentor people. Of course, I don't mentor too many people because I don't have time. But my model of mentoring is that it's for me giving back. It's for me about helping somebody else succeed. It's about creating another success story. And so, what I would advise is look for people who have been successful, who are no longer motivated by money. Right? If they're still motivated by money and they still want a percentage of your company, that's a different kind of mentor, actually. Um, I'm not saying they will not do well, I'm just saying that's not my model for mentoring.
Got it. Got it. Um, so you said
And
about
so
your,
be specific about what you look for. Sometimes you want a mentor to solve technology issues. Then you find maybe somebody from an academic background or somebody who's working in R&D from another organization, somebody who's a techie. But if you want somebody with business knowledge or finance, then look for somebody with that background. So you know very clearly what are the things that you're looking for, and then look for a mentor with that background and ask around. Ask around and find out from your peers whom have they found as best mentors. I can also tell you that now the ecosystem has developed so much so that there are angel investors who can act as mentors. Of course, they will take some investment, but they're putting money. I don't mind somebody putting money and taking a percentage. I don't want that mentor to say, since I'm mentoring, I want 2% of the company. Put that money. You are small, the valuations are low, so just put the money up, and so angel investors are possible, and then you network and find out the right mentors. Incubators are there, accelerators are there. They
Mhm.
also provide mentorship.
Right. There was a question that came about your mentoring. The question was, if you were to mentor a student, what are the top three things that you would recommend her?
Uh,
Student specifically.
Student, right? I would say, one, look for a wave to ride on.
Mhm.
Because these are where the best opportunities are. Today, for example, if you are a student, I would say the intersection of computing and biology is a very hot field, actually. Computing and robotics or mechanical engineering, very hot field. So look for these such trends which are going to create huge opportunities, right? In computing itself, for example, machine learning is the hot area, and machine learning is going to be applied to every single um, discipline, even in even in literature and things like that. To do literature search, etc. Now machine learning algorithms are being used, so it becomes actually a horizontal capability that you need to build. Second is, depending on your circumstances, create a horizon for you to achieve the goals that you set. You must have some goals, and create a horizon for you to achieve those goals, and work step by step to achieve those goals. That's very, very important. The third thing is, don't pursue money. Pursue your goals, which are, I want to climb Everest, or I want to create a successful startup. The money will be the result of doing something. Money is not the objective or the goal. Uh, yes, everybody requires a certain minimum amount to be satisfied, but that's a result of achieving something, and set those as the goals. And the last thing I would say is, help others, and if people around you are successful, you will automatically be successful.
Right. Right. So, folks, all of you who are listening, it took like 5 years for me to understand about the first point that Chris mentioned after starting my company about riding a wave. So, yeah, that, and he also mentioned some of the key areas that you can start focusing on. Does not mean that is exhaustive, but yeah, please take a note of that. Um, Chris, one question about the startup idea that came up was, how do you know if your startup idea already exists?
Of course, you have to do today, you can do searches for companies in that space. You can read up on those companies. And when you also start pitching this idea, pitch this idea with potential investors, maybe angel investors or institutional investors, you will clearly know, because they would track this space. They would know who are the players in this space. But today, an internet search will throw up companies which are working in this space. See, before you start the company, do some research, uh, and 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 today, with that research, you will be able to find out whether somebody is there in that space. No, I don't. Don't have any doubt about that.
It's a related question, actually. Second part of the question is copycatting a good strategy for Indian market if the competitor is also a startup?
Not just startup. It may be that somebody has done well in one market and they are not looking to expand into India immediately. So you can actually bring that idea to India, but you need to kind of customize it, or you need to localize it for the Indian market. An example is when Flipkart started, for example, they pioneered this concept of cash on delivery. Because the Indian
Yes.
consumer doesn't have credit card or doesn't want to use a credit card, right? So cash on delivery was required. So you need to localize the idea to suit the market and things like that. There are hyper local opportunities. India is such a large country that there are markets that are small for a large company to get into. So there are many such opportunities. The key thing is to uh, define your market, and based on that, you need to design your company and you need to design the philosophy of um, financial modeling. What I mean by this is, if your market is the entire world, then being the dominant player in that is very important, and hence you may actually opt to um, take on huge losses to capture that market. But if your market is, let's say, Bangalore, and typically that's what you're focused on, you need to become profitable sooner than later, so that you don't have to worry about competition coming into your market, because when competition comes in, it's possible that you will lose out. It's possible that your investors will stop investing, you will run out of money, etc. So if you're profitable, you can bootstrap and continue to survive. So that's how you need to think about your business. I would advise that, when you prove your idea, when you create a minimum viable product, when you get your first few customers, you also become profitable. You prove that you can become profitable. Then you take a decision whether you want to rapidly scale up with investment dollars, investment rupees, or investment money, or you want to continue to be grow with profits. There's nothing wrong. Both models are right.
Got it. So find a problem, find a small market, and then kind of figure out your unit economics, and then decide whether you want to bootstrap it or race around and then scale.
Exactly.
Perfect. One of the things that I struggled when I started the company is people kind of say that think big. It's a random thing that people throws around all the time. But then when I was doing my first company, even now, like how do we condition our brains to think big?
Well, see, let me say, why do they say think big? You need to understand the investor philosophy. A VC typically in a fund will make about 40 investments, in a period of, let's say, 5 years. That's their investment period, and then they will further invest to support their companies, follow-on investments over the next 2-3 years. But they will also um, um, start selling, start getting returns from their investment, etc. Because they have to start returning the money. The period of a fund is typically 8 years or 10 years, and if it's 8 years, you have to return the money to the investors in 8 years. That means after 5 years, you'll have to start getting returns on the investment and things like that. So you need to understand that philosophy. In 5 years, typically in a year, you make 8 investments. 5 years, 40 investments. Where do the investors make money? Out of the 40 investments, they'll make money on maybe 5.
Right.
About 15 or 20, they will just break even. Remaining, they will lose money. So what happens? The 5 that they bet on must be big ideas, which gives us 10x, 20x, 100x returns. 100x returns means that investor is a huge successful investor, right? So they all look for big ideas. They all look for big markets. That's where the investor is excited to invest in the company. And that's why they're asking you that question, how big is this idea? That's why they're forcing you to think big, etc. I wouldn't get carried away by this. You must actually think about your idea, your market. There is nothing wrong in being small, being profitable, and working with few customers, providing them good solutions. You are employing good people, you're paying them salaries, you're keeping the customers happy. There's nothing wrong. The world contains more MSMEs, small and medium enterprises, than large companies. There is one or two Google or Facebook or Microsoft, etc., but there are hundreds and hundreds of or thousands of small companies.
Right. Right. So you're saying that essentially it's your choice whether you want to make it a big company or you want to run a lifestyle
Right. Don't
business.
get pushed by investors. If you can be independent of investors, that's actually gives you a lot of freedom.
Got it. Related to it, I think you started doing this with this last answer. What is your advice to a first-time startup CEO?
So being a CEO in some sense is a lonely job, and you need to prepare yourself to lead a company because you have to take tough decisions. Um, uh, you know, One of the founders is the CEO. Other people are actually doing other roles, reporting into you. Sometimes if the person is not doing a good job, you have to evaluate, you have to give them feedback. Sometimes you have to fire them.
Right.
Right? That's why being a CEO becomes actually a lonely job. So you need to actually find peers you can talk to. You have to create a support mechanism around you. Find mentors who have been CEOs, etc. Um, Something which, if you prepare yourself, if you plan your activities properly, um, it's rewarding also because you feel you've taken the right decisions, especially if the company is successful and grown the company, right?
Right.
And you need CEOs. Somebody has to take that job.
Sure. Yeah. Somebody has to carry that burden. Um, so a couple of people asked this on the live chat and also earlier. A lot of people are graduating this year into a very difficult situation, right? Probably the most difficult time in the past 100 years. And it's going to be challenging to them. So what is your thought process? What is your advice or opinion for them?
A lot of research has proven that if you graduate in a year where jobs are scarce, unemployment is high, compensation is not going to be very high, this will impact your career for the next several years.
Mhm.
Right? You will um, get a percentage increase every year, but you're starting with a significant lower scale. Right? So my advice, if it is possible, everybody's circumstance is different, is to continue studying. Avoid looking for a job this year, but you don't want to stay idle. So actually go out and find something interesting to continue to learn. Like I've said, ride a wave. So figure out something that will add to your resume and continue study for next, let's say, 1 or 2 years. It's not going to last more than a year or two. Things will become normal. And so, kind of postpone the time that you graduate to get a job. You will graduate now, but continue your studies.
Understood. Understood. We have like 10 more minutes, but I want to make sure that we touch a little bit on your Axelar part of your career right now. You're the chairman of Axelar Ventures, which is a venture fund. So can you talk to us a little bit about why Axelar and what are you trying to do with Axelar now?
So when we step down from Infosys, myself, Shibilal, Srinath Bhatni, and the other uh, Ganapati, who is the CEO, is also ex-Infosys, and then we have Tarun Khanna, who is a professor at Harvard. We are the 5 founders of Axelar. What we decided was, can we come together and help startups improve their um, probability of success? So what we say is that improve the odds for success is what our goal is. The way we do it is there are lots of known mistakes people make, And there are mistakes that are unknown, known unknowns and uh, known knowns kind of thing, So, sorry, unknown knowns and unknowns, right? So anything that is known, anything that we know a mistake somebody has made, try not to make it. And so our program at Axelor is to uh, tell the founders the mistakes others have made and prevent those mistakes being made in these companies. So things like founder agreement, have a proper registration, make sure that you've thought through your financial plan, make sure that you validate your product with the customer. Now, many a time, I found that founders think that this is a idea that's great because they themselves have found the need. But does the market need it? Does somebody else need it? Are there enough number of customers who will pay for it? So go out and explore these things. So we ask a series of questions. In fact, we have a 100-day program, which is over about a three and a half month program, and each week the the company is asked to answer one question,
Mhm.
right? And come back and report. And that systematic process allows them to correct lots of mistakes that they would have otherwise not corrected. And that's how we improve the odds of success. The second thing that we do is we prepare them for the next round of investment and bring them in front of our network of VCs. We have about 40-45 VCs in our network, and typically each company will get to pitch to at least 8-10 VCs. We'll prepare them with the pitch deck and how to pitch and things like that. Rehearse that properly, and then expose them to these VCs. And that's what we do.
Got
And
it.
we invest in
And
these companies.
sure. So for the startups who are attending, I have personally visited the Axelar office, and then I've seen the process, the team there. I speak with Ashutosh, Chris, all the time, and Ashutosh is a very hands-on guy. He really spends a lot of time with the startups. I still get emails from him asking to connect startups to certain companies or certain people in the US. So it's a great program if you want to, get some mentoring and hands-on support. Um, so, what is your sweet spot ticket size, Chris, as a fund? Is it a seed fund level VC?
So we look at 25 lakhs to 3 crores. That's the typical size. Then what happens is Axelo stops investing, and then we invest as individuals because all of us have our own family offices and investment vehicles. And so the transition happens from Axelo to family office or individuals. But Axelo's ticket size is 25 lakhs to 3 crores.
Got it. And at what level do you come into a company? Are you the first check into the company?
First, institutional investor. We call ourselves institutional angel,
Got it.
right? So we typically work with the company in the first 2 years of their life. We want to make sure that they're set up properly, they've thought through all the things, they create the right business plan, they validate the product properly, etc.
Yeah. So typically somebody had an MVP, maybe a few customers, maybe starting to get their customers have an
Right.
angel investment. No,
You,
even
you
before that.
can you can just have an MVP and also come. And we will take you through the process of finding the customer and things like that. So early on, first 2 years of existence.
Got it. So Sandeep is asking, can companies outside Bangalore approach Axelor?
Typically, in a batch, 40% of the companies are actually outside Bangalore from the uh, from the NCR region or from Bombay or Pune. We have several companies who have come from outside. We typically ask them to travel to Bangalore once a week or once in 2 weeks. Remaining time is through using technology and things like that. And I think more and more we are getting used to doing things now on uh, video conference and things like that, and that probably means less travel. Uh, we have space at Axelor, so we encourage these companies to be co-located, And the reason for that is, you actually learn from each other. So in a batch, we have up to 20 companies. And imagine being in an environment where there are 20, 30 founders. Second, we have typically events happening every week at Axelor where we invite successful entrepreneurs, people from the industry to come and address the founders. We have mentoring sessions, all these things. And it's, if you visited Axelor, you know that it's a very nice place in a city like Bangalore to have that kind of open space and a place to sit out and enjoy nature is very useful. It's not a very large space, but it's a very nice space.
Yeah, and I can attest to it. I've been there. The place is good. They have some outdoor sitting space and they have some space to walk outside. So it's actually a pretty nice place, the Axelor office. So if somebody wants to approach Axelor, Chris, how should it? Do they directly go to the website and apply? What is the best way?
Yeah. Best way is to go through the website and we try and reply to every request that we get. Uh, our batches are once in 6 months. Typically, we do 2 batches a year, each up to 20. And so in a year, we do 40 typically.
Got it. So Chris, we have the last 4 minutes. I want to jump into a quick kind of a rapid fire thing. Very quick answers if possible. What would you change in Infi if you had to start Infosys now?
Clearly, we would execute faster. We took 23 years for the first $1 billion, 23 months for the second, 13 months for the third billion, etc. So we took 23 years to get the first billion. Today, we have companies hitting the billion mark, much faster, right? The environment is very different. So we'll probably execute faster, and we should execute faster.
Perfect. So there are two schools of thoughts that says an entrepreneur is not born, they are made. Do you agree with that statement?
Yes, I strongly feel that there are several things that you can learn and become good at. Having said that, there is something that is intrinsic, in terms of risk taking. Certain people have a propensity to take risk, in fact, sometimes too much risk, right? That risk taking characteristic is probably something you're born with. But entrepreneurship per se, there's a science behind it, and you can systematically, and in fact, you should do it systematically. You should do it in a measured way, and you can learn a lot of things and become a successful entrepreneur.
Perfect. Who is one of your favorite CEOs that, in the current time that you say, oh, that person is doing good?
Today, if I look around, suddenly the name just simply out of my Microsoft. It's amazing how
Satya?
Yeah, how Satya Nadella has turned this business around, and the valuation has gone up by, I think, 4 or 5 times from the time he took over. People were doubting where the company would go. At Infosys, I had had a lot of interactions with Satya when he was running the Bing business, then he was running the cloud business, and and suddenly he becomes the best CEO in the world, right? Most successful CEO in the world. It's an amazing transformation, and hats off to the person. It's really amazing. And it's good that he's a person of Indian origin.
Sure, absolutely. All of us can be proud. What is your favorite book?
There is no one book. I pick a theme, read 2, 3 books in that theme. Because I'm reading so much technology material, suddenly I got introduced to this Shiva trilogy. Amit, what's the last name now? Yeah. So that's a historical fiction. So when I pick something, I read everything that I can get on that. So I read the trilogy. I read the Ramayana trilogy that he has written. So that's what I'm reading right now. Of course, I'm reading a lot of things on COVID and things like that. One interesting book is um, when the breath becomes still. It's about somebody who's diagnosed with cancer,
Mhm.
and stage 4 cancer, and he knows that he's going to die, and he's written that book. There are some very nice
When
books.
breath becomes air.
Yeah, yes, when breath becomes.
Yeah. So what is the best advice you ever got?
Um, there are lots of opportunities in life. I missed joining MBBS after my pre-degree by 2 marks, and that devastated me. And then I went to a tuition teacher to study maths because I had not taken maths in pre-degree, and I took BSc physics, so I had to learn maths again. So I went for tuition, and the best advice he said was, "This is not the end of life. No, there are significant opportunities ahead of you. You do your best, and things will come back." Of course, from our BSc Physics in University College Trivandrum, I joined IIT Madras, and things changed, right? So I felt that it was the right advice at the right encouragement at the right time, and uh, you know, I was completely lost at that point because I didn't want to become a botany teacher somewhere or something like that because that's what I had in front of me. I decided to take a risk, join physics, um, and it worked out.
Right. It did. What is your advice to your own 20-year-old?
Uh, it's a world full of opportunities. You just find, as I said, find the wave. Today, I would say, look at life sciences, intersection of life sciences and computing. It's an exciting field. Um, you know, and you'll get the thrill of actually discovering new things. Cure for cancer, cure for Alzheimer's, infectious diseases, antimicrobial resistance. So many problems, and every single one of them will require you to analyze data, use computing, uh, understand life. What is life about? How did it happen? How can inanimate things become living beings? All kinds of things, wonderful things. We have lots and lots to learn, understand, and that's what is exciting, and that's what I would ask anybody to pursue today.
Perfect. With that, we came to the end of this amazing session. I would like to thank Chris for all his time and transparent, candid thoughts. I would also like to thank all the participants. We had consistently about 155 participants, which I think is the best that I have ever seen. So I hope, I know I did not ask all the questions because there were so many questions coming my way that came. I tried my best, but hopefully we'll get Chris again at some point of time where we can ask some of those questions. Chris, do you have any
Thank
closing
you.
thoughts?
Yeah. Thank you all. My request is to stay safe in these difficult times, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. This is going to go away at some point. We don't know when, but it's going to go away. And if you are able to survive, if you are able to build resilience in you, I think that skill itself is going to be very useful for you for the rest of the life. So thank you all very much for giving me this opportunity. And thanks, Arjun, and thanks to IEEE for giving me this platform.
Special thanks to Jibin for putting this together. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Chris.
Bye.